Here's what's coming up on today's show.
You have to look at a statement on a 401k, and you have to look to see if there is company stock in that plan. Because if you don't, and then you roll that money into an IRA, I think there might be some issues with that client if they realize that you blew an NUA opportunity for them, especially if they could have saved a chunk of money in taxes had they pursued NUA.
This is the Retire Happy podcast with John Amarino, a fiduciary financial advisor at Securus Financial in the San Diego area, and Thomas O'Connell, president of International Financial Advisory Group, Inc. in Parsippany, New Jersey. Together, they'll be keeping retirement happy from coast to coast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Retire Happy podcast. I'm your host on the West Coast, John Marino, and I am joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host on the East Coast, Mr. Tom O'Connell. Tommy, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Johnny I. What's shaking and baking out there on the West Coast?
Nothing. Hopefully the rainy season is getting beyond us. So we did a little camping trip over Easter, and now it's spring break. So we had a tournament, and normally I can talk about Jake's accomplishments, but this tournament was a learning lesson. He had a brutal tournament. So, but I said, hey, it happens to everyone, and we got big news. I shared it with you that he got invited to the Perfect Game California All-State Tournament. So that'll be this summer. So good things. And how about you? How was college? The colleges?
College visits were interesting. There's not much baking here, but last Friday we did have a little bit of a shaking with our 4.8 earthquake.
Welcome to the show.
So that was interesting. Yeah, no, but we Emma and I did a couple more college visits, and so it looks like the South Bronx of New York is going to be her college destination. So Fordham University, but not totally official. But that's where the easy money is betting out in Las Vegas these days.
That's what Otani's got the over on Fordham.
He's got the over under on that one.
Or I mean, his translator who has access to $5 million. Anyways. Well, hey, that's good, Tommy, because that's a heck of an accomplishment, Fordham, and
that's a good school.
Yeah, bright future in front of her. So speaking of accomplishments, today's podcast is going to be on the accomplishment that a lot of people are now entering retirement, and they've done a great job accumulating assets inside their 401ks. And now it's time to live off those assets and perhaps roll those assets into an IRA, or, do they have NUAs or stock options? So today we are going to talk about mistakes that can happen when we're dealing with retirement funds. And Tommy, why don't you introduce our return expert guest?
Yes. Another returning expert, Andy Ives, who is one of the premier IRA specialists in America. I met Andy a bunch of years ago. He works on the Ed Slott staff. He is one of three advisors that help the advisors. So anytime guys like myself or you, John, we have as elite members of the Ed Slott organization, anytime we have questions about things we're not sure, or we're hearing something different than what we've been taught, Andy is one of the guys that we all turn to. And I've really utilized Andy over the last couple of years. I would think he's pretty much been my primary go-to person anytime I have a question about stuff. So it's a pleasure and honor to have him back on the show. He's just a well full of knowledge. And so, I feel privileged and lucky to have him in my corner, and as should our clients, John. I mean, really, these are, we work with a lot of higher end people with big IRAs and 401ks that just the simplest mistakes, the simplest missteps can cause literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in unnecessary tax consequences. So having a guy like Andy helping our clients out is a real privilege. So with that, let's get Andy on there.
And our special guest this episode, Andy Ives, an IRA analyst for Ed Slott Company, LLC.
Hey, very kind words. Thank you very much, and happy to be back.
Andy, like Tom said, I can't say enough about your presentation skills. You just taught, at the last conference out here in La Jolla that I attended, and 400 pages of information that you guys cover in 12 hours, and you give a lot of that presentation, and your way to just simplify things for advisors and explain things is really second to none. I took a lot away from it. It's not to take away anything from any of the other advisors that also taught, but you definitely are a great presenter.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Both parents are teachers and educators, so hopefully some of that trickled down to me, and I can, continue with their skills as teaching some dry and complicated material. So thank you for that.
Yeah, dry is probably a good word, but for guys geeks like John and I, we love this stuff. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of other advisors in our organization that kind of roll their eyes, but I love going to those meetings. I always walk away with golden nuggets. And so for me, I love it. I love doing it. So I really appreciate everything that you do.
Well, I'll tell you what opened my eyes. We had there was a woman at one of our meetings who wasn't a financial advisor. She had nothing to do in the profession. She was just a retirement geek. She claimed herself. She was like a groupie that just loved retirement stuff and actually paid all the money to go to this event to go through a 400-page manual as her fun hobby on the weekend.
Oh my God, that's way weirder. That's way weirder than me.
Each their own. Well, I guess, it's better than playing pickleball, I guess, right? And so, Andy, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is Tommy you talked about the fact that, these conferences like this, education material like this, Tommy and I really do geek out on it because I'm a big 80-20 person. And really, I preach to my clients all the time that the 20% of true value is in the planning that we can bring. If the market's not doing good, the silver lining and being able to perhaps do some Roth conversions or stuff like that in a down market. And it's really the information that conferences like that you and Ed and your group put on. But the importance of what we're going to talk about today can be huge. And lately, a lot of our colleagues have been hitting Tommy and I up with questions that we're going to talk about today to get this general information out. It's general to Tommy and I, but it's really complicated to a lot of people and how they can avoid very costly mistakes. And, some of the things that we're going to talk about, and Tom, I'm going to let you talk about the first one is the age 55 exemption of 401ks and the opportunities or mistakes clients can make. So, Tommy, why don't you talk about have your first questions for Andy on that?
Sure, I'm gonna pivot over. I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about a little bit, which again we get a lot of calls from our fellow advisors for help, is NUAs, right? And we did a program last year on that with Andy. Andy's really one of the foremost experts in NUA, net unappreciated. Net unrealized appreciation. Thank you. And I think, and one of the things I keep getting a lot of questions about, people seem to be confusing those with stock options, right? Restricted options or qualified options, those types of things. And that's not what an NUA is. So, Andy, maybe let's just start from the ground up and explain what NUA is, what the advantages, disadvantages are, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, NUA is great. It's a great opportunity for folks that might have stock in their 401k plan that is highly appreciated. Now, highly appreciated is a subjective term, so there's not a one answer fits everybody situation. But if you have something that's quote unquote highly appreciated, If you did not pursue NUA, if all you did was just basically take your 401k money in your stock and take it out of the plan, or if you rolled it to an IRA and you in the future at some point took a distribution of those shares or sold them and took the cash, you would pay ordinary income on all that money, on all that appreciation. NUA allows you to pay capital gains on the appreciation. So that is, in a nutshell, what NUA is. It is the spread in taxes from paying ordinary income versus paying long-term capital gains. So that spread, that difference is what is the advantage or the benefit of the NUA tax strategy.
And that's huge.
Now, yeah, it could be. But like I said, everybody's different. You might have $100,000 of appreciation. To some people, they might not be able to save that much money in taxes with $100,000. Another person might say, you know what, that makes sense to me to save a couple of grand if I can save a couple of grand. So, like I said, it's not a one size fits all. I say there's a tipping point with NUA, a tipping point where it makes sense for a person. And identifying that tipping point is the art of NUA. But if you can identify that tipping point, and if you can properly implement the strategy, you can certainly save some folks a chunk of tax money.
Yeah, and Andy, before we go into some of the mistakes, can we just talk briefly about how to identify? Because I've had some people not understand, and I've even had advisors when I've looked on some blogs about having non-qualified stock options, not NUAs, but the advisors were talking, it's an NUA. It's not. Can we talk about really knowing whether that stock is inside your 401k or whether it's a stock option?
Yeah, it's got to be in the plan. It has got to be stock held within your 401k. And when I say stock, that also works for stock funds. I know a lot of plans will have a person buy stock funds because they can buy partial shares. And then when the person retires or they leave, they convert those stock funds to actual shares. But it's got to be within the 401k. It can't be some sort of, some special stock option plan or anything. It could be an ESOP. ESOP would work, but it can't be some sort of non-qualified company-owned shares.
Right. So it has to be the shares have to be inside your 401k. It can't be in a side individual or trust account.
That's right. It's got to be within the plan. A qualified account like a 401k or an ESOP will work, but again, got to be in a qualified account.
So one thing you had explained to me, Andy, at one point, I don't remember, a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, was that you could also privately held company stock can be in that plan as well. It's not just a publicly traded stock.
That's right. Yeah, you can do private company stock. That certainly will work. You're not restricted to just like what's listed on the the Dow or NASDAQ or anything like that. It can certainly be a private company. Some flexibility for sure with NUA, as long as it is stock held within the account, with a qualified account like a 401k. There's a good chance you can work with NUA with the NUA strategy.
Yeah, I mean something like that where you're purchasing some shares as a private company. And then it goes public, right? Because typically you're buying those shares at very discounted values when you're a privately held corporation. And just imagine what you could do with a Roth conversion on something like that too. I believe Peter Thiel, something along those lines is how he was able to make such a huge impact on his Roth IRA.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he had he bought his company shares at just fractions on the dollar. Didn't do anything wrong, and then that appreciated significantly. So that was in a Roth. So yeah, there's a bunch of different strategies you can do. Certainly buying those shares within a Roth IRA allows you the opportunity for that to have significant growth, all tax-free. If those shares have already been in a qualified account and are pre-tax, if you did a Roth conversion, you'd be paying tax on the whole thing. So NUA might be a better strategy to, instead of paying ordinary income on all those shares, you wouldn't have them in a Roth, but at least you can possibly reduce the tax to long-term capital gains rates versus the ordinary income with an NUA strategy.
Right.
All right, Andy. So let's talk about the 5 NUA mistakes you can't afford. And mistake number 1 is kind of like I was at the beginning of the show, trying to get Tommy to talk about age 55, but that's quick draw McGraw, right? How you guys coined it. And that's really moving the company's stock into the IRA prematurely.
Yeah, that's true. If you roll company stock, if you've got this highly appreciated company stock in your 401k and you roll it into an IRA, you will never be able to use the NUA strategy on that stock. You have eliminated that possibility once it rolls into an IRA. So we call it quick draw McGraw because I can just picture like a young advisor super eager to get some money under their name, under their assets under management. So they roll this 401k into an IRA, and they're very happy this money is now under their purview, but they just could have obliterated an NUA opportunity because they were too quick on the draw to get that money into the IRA account. So I tell people all the time, you have to look at a statement on a 401k, and you have to look to see if there is company stock in that plan. Because if you don't, and then you roll that money into an IRA, I think there might be some issues with that client if they realize that you blew an NUA opportunity for them, especially if they could have saved a chunk of money in taxes had they pursued NUA. So yeah, be careful with being too quick on the draw.
And I believe in your manual, it states that the IRS stated this election is irrevocable. Therefore, the eligible rollover distribution is not eligible for the exclusion from gross income for net unrealized appreciation on the employer stock. So the election is irrevocable.
Yeah, once you roll it over, you can't put it back. So once you hit send, basically, that decision is made.
And that, like you said, Andy, that would be a tough one to be explaining to a client. Whoops, I blew a $200,000 tax savings because, I didn't know what I was doing.
And you talk about the difference in tax rates on capital gains. I mean, 24%, 28%, or 15, or 33, or 15. Mm-hmm. That's significant.
Yep.
Yeah, especially if you're a high earner and maybe you have a pension or you have these huge IRAs or 401ks that you're going to be living off of. You got clients who maybe are taking $200,000-$300,000 a year distributions to fund their lifestyles from ththese plans. And like you just said, John, I mean, there's a huge difference between a 15% capital gain tax and a 24 or 32% income tax rate. It's a lot of money. One of the other big mistakes I think people are making is they don't get it done in one calendar year.
That's true. Yeah. Once you decide to move forward with an NUA transaction, you have to get it done before the end of that calendar year. If you don't, if you miss the end of the calendar year, then that can disqualify the NUA transaction. So the entire account needs to be moved. Your NUA appreciated stock typically gets transferred to an in kind to a non-qualified, just a regular brokerage account, but everything else in the account is then rolled over to an IRA. So it's a lump sum distribution. You have to empty the 401k, and if you don't complete it in time, that could also be the death knell for the NUA strategy.
So, and you brought up a good point at the conference, is you said to start this process early in the year and definitely never start this after Thanksgiving. So let's say we have a person that, because I'm actually looking at a potential client right now that is going to retire at Thanksgiving. That will be their last day, and so in this case, they're going to want to wait until 2025 to do this in January.
That would be my recommendation. You can't just do an NUA transaction whenever you want. You have to hit what we call trigger events. One of those trigger events is separation from service. So if that person separates from service in Thanksgiving, they can't do NUA before an NUA transaction beforehand. But once they hit that trigger, now their NUA door is open, essentially. The light is on, the light is green for them to move forward. They don't have to do it in the same calendar year that they hit one of those triggers. So best bet for that person is if they hit that trigger, just pump the brakes, wait until 2025, then you have the entire year to process the transaction and do the lump sum distribution. And you can rest easy knowing you have plenty of time to get it done.
I was going to ask John, just as a follow-up to that, what might be something that somebody might do that might unring that bell in John's instance?
So John said this person's going to separate from service in Thanksgiving. So that means that they fit the trigger. What I like to say is their light is on. Like I said, the green light is on. If they were then to call activate that trigger, where that light starts to flash, that means they got to move now and get this transaction done before the end of the year. So if this person separates from service at Thanksgiving, and then let's say a week or two later, they take a couple $1,000s out of their account to maybe pay for upcoming Christmas gifts or something, that account has been activated, so to speak. So that light is now flashing. Now they would have to get that NUA transaction completed before the end of this year. If they don't, because they activated that trigger by taking a distribution, that light will go off at the end of the year, and they will have lost that separation from service trigger. And that could potentially eliminate the chance for NUA at any time from that account until maybe after they die and they don't, and their beneficiaries can't do it, which is another mistake we're going to talk about. But yeah, you have to be very careful with the timing. When you hit your trigger, what your transactions are on that account, and what is the calendar saying to you as far as timing.
So Andy, you had mentioned it a couple times, and Tommy also mentioned trigger. You mind just telling the listeners what are the triggers for NUA?
Yes, for sure. There's only 4 of them. There is age 59 and a half. These are the easy ones. People get 59 and a half. That's one that people typically can get to. There is separation from service. That's another one that people can typically get to. No problem. They can separate from service. But there's a couple of other ones that are specific to situations like disability. It's only for the self-employed. So I have yet to see a disability trigger because, again, it's only for the self-employed. And I also said separation from service. That is not for the self-employed. I've had someone say they had their own business and they tried to create a fake trigger by separating from service to generate this fake trigger so that they could do an NUA transaction, and then they were going to start a new company or go back to work at their company. Can't do that. So it's not for the self-employed. So reaching 59 and a half, separation from service, disability, only for the self-employed, and then death. So if a person dies with all this highly appreciated company stock in their 401k, NUA is available to their beneficiaries. So that's another reason why quick draw McGraw or being too quick to roll this money into an inherited IRA without considering NUA could get you behind the 8 ball when it comes to the beneficiaries and what their tax situation is.
So, and just to confirm for our listeners, and this is a question that, Tommy will talk about later, if you're separating from service at age 55 and a half, you meet that trigger.
55.
Yeah. So 55. So that meets it, not the 59 and a half for the IRA, correct?
That's true. You could separate from service at 35, at 45. A separation from service is a trigger. Okay. So let's say someone works, I don't know, at Silicon Valley or something back in the day, and they've got a cost basis of $50,000 in their shares, which has ballooned to now $1 million. And they leave their company when they're 40 years old. That is a trigger. They could do NUA. If they were to do the NUA transaction on this $50,000 basis $1 million account, because they're under 55, they don't qualify for that age 55 exception. They're under 59 and a half. They would have a 10% penalty, but only on the cost basis. So in that situation, I'm a 40-year-old. I do an NUA transaction. I've got a $50,000 cost basis. I am happy to pay a $5,000 penalty if they can save me a significant tax hit on the $950,000 of appreciation.
Right.
Great point.
Yeah. So John, what's another common mistake on that list that people are making?
So one thing that I've seen some people over the past year, older retirees that just love their job, and now they've got RMDs coming up and making distributions with that NUA, option in their plan. So Andy, you want to talk a little bit more about RMDs, and you mentioned the distribution, around Christmas time, but RMDs are distributions, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So using your scenario where a person loves their job and they're not planning on separating from service anytime soon, if they hit 59 and a half, that's a trigger. So their NUA light would essentially be on. But then let's say 13, 14 years down the road, now they're 74, and now RMDs start to pay out of the account. A taxable distribution like an RMD will activate it. That will make that NUA light flash. And there's no way around it because you've got to take the RMD. So if that RMD kicks out, and if that person doesn't pursue NUA, they will have lost that trigger. So it can sneak up on you, some of these distributions, and activate your NUA trigger light.
So let's say you do love your job. Your trigger is 59 and a half, but you're not going to leave work. Mm-hmm. Can you do a partial NUA? In other words, can I pick up my stock piece and move that out and still qualify for the NUA, and leaving let's say my Vanguard index fund intact in the 401k?
You cannot. You
Okay.
have to empty the account. So I've had people ask that question, and you can't. So they've got to empty the account. But then the next question is, okay, I'll do a lump sum distribution. I'll take my NUA. I'll roll everything else over to my IRA. But then I want to come back and participate in the plan again in future years, and you cannot. You got to basically shut it down. You are forfeiting your participation in that plan when you do NUA.
Okay.
Which is another thing if you're still working at 73 or 75, it might just be easier just to, since you're at RMD age for the example, it might just be easier to keep your money in your 401k until you're going to separate service. Would you agree, Andy?
Yeah, there's a bunch of options. So if I'm in that boat, if I'm a 74-year-old and I love my job and RMD is going to start kicking out, now my trigger has been activated. My 15.5 trigger is activated. I have to sit down and do some tax planning to see if NUA is good for me now. I can certainly do an NUA transaction, but I would have to empty the account and, again, forfeit my participation. Does it make sense for me tax-wise and monetarily to do that? Or I could just say, you know what? I'm going to forfeit my 59.5 trigger. I'm going to continue to work and work and work and work. And then when I do separate from service, I will have another trigger and that light will go back on, and then I can pursue NUA at that point. Or if I really love my job and I'm going to work until the day I die, death, as we said, is a trigger, and my beneficiaries could take advantage of the NUA strategy.
Right. So Tommy, what's another issue that you know about when it comes to NUAs?
Selling your stock too quickly. Andy, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. People see all this stuff about, oh, I've got a concentrated position. I was told I need to trim back my ownership in this account. Or, they think about back in the day with Enron, or our company just tanks and they're worried about it. So they just bail. They sell everything, or they sell a huge portion of their stock for whatever reason. Even if it's a good company, like I said, maybe they've got this concentrated position and they're looking to trim back. It might not make the best sense to do such a thing. Look at NUA and see if you can do the NUA transaction, get that money out of the plan into a non-qualified brokerage account, take advantage of that tax break, and then once it's out of the 401k, then you can start to trim back that position. So that might make sense. Again, selling out too quickly could put you behind the 8 ball once again when it comes to NUA.
And again, for listeners, what's Ed Slott's favorite, term right now is taxes are on sale, right? And how many more months do we have until, we have the sun setting and we have, adjustments in a negative way in the tax code. So it's really important to understand that. And I think you would agree too, Andy, that you do have to, it's a fine balance. Tommy and I have both talked about this a lot, the tax implication to the market risk of being over concentrated in a stock.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, that gets back to the art of NUA. What makes sense for a person? What might make sense for person A might not make sense for person B. And there's some flexibility with NUA as well. John, you mentioned that taxes are on sale, but even though they're on sale, if I've got this massive position in my account and I'm going to do an NUA transaction, let's say my cost basis is $500,000 and it's a $2 million position. If I do an NUA transaction, NUA rules state that I have to pay ordinary income on the basis. Maybe I can't afford the taxes on 500 grand. You can be creative here and say, maybe I can afford the taxes on 250. So you can take half of that stock, do an NUA transaction with half of it, the 250 plus the appreciation applicable to that stock. The other stock you can roll to an IRA. You will never be able to do NUA on that stock that rolls to an IRA, but at least you can do some tax planning and take advantage of a partial NUA transaction.
Everything has to come out of that account. I want to make sure that the listeners understand that. Andy's not saying that you're only doing a partial distribution from that 401k account. Everything is coming out. It's just that he's separating some of that stock holding.
That's right. That's right. The other stock that you don't do an NUA transaction with, that will get rolled over to the IRA with all of your vanguards, funds or cash or whatever, like you mentioned before.
Right.
Great point, Tom. And lastly, you already mentioned it earlier, but let's just dig in a little bit more on the last mistake is not telling beneficiaries about NUA.
Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. People, when you inherited a 401k account or when you inherited any account, I'm sure there's some emotions involved. People aren't, they're looking for guidance. But once again, before just moving that money out of the plan into an inherited account, consider NUA, because that beneficiary will have access to the NUA strategy. If that stock is highly appreciated, just like the person could have done when they were alive, their beneficiaries could have that stock transferred in kind to a non-qualified brokerage account. And again, pay long-term capital gains on the appreciation as opposed to ordinary income if they were to not pursue the NUA strategy.
Again, a huge possible savings for people.
Absolutely.
Now, I know some tricky people might be like, well, can I get the step up in basis and then claim NUA?
Yeah, no work, no deal there. A lot of people have a lot of things. They'll ask about step up in basis. That's not going to work. They'll say, I want to do the NUA transaction, put it into my non-qualified regular brokerage account, and then within 60 days, I'm going to put it into my IRA as a 60-day rollover. No deal. That will also kill the NUA transaction. So everybody's looking for an angle, but it's pretty straightforward. You can't do all these creative things that people want to do.
Yep, there's no step up in basis from qualified assets. Let's just put that one to bed.
Right.
Yep. So, Tommy, let's go back to my original topic. Your age 55 separation from service. So you've had this come up a couple times recently. So why don't you talk about that?
Right. So I have someone who is actually going to turn 55 at the end of this week, going to be retiring after 30 plus years on the job. And they said to me, they said, well, I need about $20,000 to pay off some credit cards. So, my advice to them simply was, well, turn 55, because there is an age 55 exemption for the early distribution penalty in government plans. In other words, in a 401k plan. It doesn't exist in an IRA. So I simply said, look, wait till after your birthday. Then you can take a distribution from your 401k, call it for the $20,000. You'll have to pay tax on that distribution, but you avoid that 10% early distribution penalty. You can pay off, your debt. Then you can make your retirement decision. And then you can make your decision whether or not you want to transfer that 401k money into an IRA. But people just have to be aware there's some eligibility rules that exist for plans and other ones that exist for IRAs.
Yeah, that's right. That's good guidance. The age 55 exception can get overlooked, or it can get misinterpreted. So you have to separate from service in the year you turn age 55 or later. So we've seen people separate from service in the year they turn 54 or 53, but then try to take a distribution a couple years later from their plan when they're 55, and that doesn't work. That does not qualify for the 10% penalty exception. You have to separate from service in the year you turn 55 or later. So in your situation, that's good advice. If that person's going to separate in the year they turn 55, they will be able to access the plan dollars without a 10% penalty exception. And I know some people like to leave some money behind. If they're going to roll, they've got a $500,000 401k, let's say, maybe leave 50,000 or 100,000 behind in the plan so that they can at least have access to some dollars before they turn 59 and a half. Because like you said, Tommy, that exception is not available within an IRA.
Now, there's also an age 50 exemption, but that's for a certain criteria of people, correct?
Yeah, public safety employees. So there's like, police, firemen, nuclear carriers, all kinds of different public safety people, Capitol Police, things like that. But yeah, that's an age 50 exception or 25 years of service, which is brand new with the Secure 2.0 Act.
Nice. Now, speaking of young retirees, because, really 55 is a young age to retire. You have clients now that, perhaps they are looking at how to pay their taxes now and buy out the IRS and do some Roth conversions. But, they're 55, they're 56. They're not at that 59 and a half age. And maybe they still have funds in their 401k and they want to get to an IRA. Andy, what says you? What's the best way to do that?
Well, Roth conversions, I'm a big fan of, and they can be done at any age. There's no restrictions on age or income limits. You can make $1 million in a year. You can make no money. You can do a Roth conversion. Where people get sideways as far as age and Roth conversions is having taxes withheld. So let's say I have a $100,000 traditional IRA and I want to convert it to a Roth. I can certainly do so. The advisor or the computer system you're doing the conversion, I might ask you if you want taxes withheld. And let's say I choose 10%. I'll end up converting 90,000 and 10,000 will then go to the IRS. That's all fine and good. But if you are under 59 and a half, the 10,000 that goes to the IRS does not get converted. It's essentially an early withdrawal, which means you're going to have a 10% penalty on the $10,000 that you sent to the IRS. So when it comes to the age limits with conversions, it's not a function of can you do the conversion or not, because you can. It's a function of do you want the taxes withheld from the IRA on the conversion? And if you're under 59 and a half, do not do that. Have those taxes paid from another source.
Right.
Well,
So, and ideally in any conversion, you want to have non-qualified dollars able to pay your tax, but especially if you're under 59 and a half, because only the IRS will penalize you for actually paying a tax in double dip.
Exactly. Yeah. Have those dollars available from another source. That way you get the full amount into the Roth IRA. The full amount can grow tax-free for you going forward.
right. That I was just going to say the same thing, John. You at the end of the day, this whole thing is a strategy to create tax-free money in the future, right? So you want as much of that money compounding as possible for as long of a period as you can. So having outside money to pay that tax, I think, is critical in the decision-making process of whether or not you're going to do that Roth conversion.
And,
Correct. I agree.
And a perfect example, maybe you can, use some of that NUA money that you moved over, and in future years, use that.
Yeah, you can combine all these different things. I mean, you have the age 55 exception, which dovetails with NUA, and as far as how old you are when you separate from service, so whether or not the penalty applies or not. Certainly, if you have some dollars that you saved from your taxes on the NUA transaction, maybe you can use that money to pay the taxes on a Roth conversion. So yeah, it's all the tentacles of all these different transactions are long.
And Andy, if I can, go ahead, Tommy, what you got?
No, go ahead. I was going to move on and talk about some other things that we see mistakes we see people are making with their 401ks and IRAs this year.
Well, if you don't mind, can we just finish up on the Roth IRA and the one other mistake? Because I've actually had people say, hey, I want to get money out of this Roth IRA, the 5-year rule on the Roth IRA conversions or contributions.
Yeah, the 5-year rule, there's really 2 5-year rules when it comes to Roth IRA. So I'm not surprised one bit that people get them confused. But when it comes to conversions, the 5-year clock applicable to conversions, if you are under 59 and a half, so let's say I'm 30 years old and I do a Roth conversion, I cannot touch those converted dollars for 5 years. Roth dollars follow very strict ordering rules. So contributions come out first, then converted dollars, then earnings. And you can't mix and match. That's the order, definitive order. You always have access to your contributions in a Roth IRA, tax and penalty free. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you put money in and you're 25 years old and you want to take it out when you're 26, if it's a contribution, yes, and that'll come out first. If you're that 30-year-old that I talked about and you do a conversion, you have to wait 5 years. After 5 years, converted dollars become available, tax and penalty free. Again, doesn't matter how old you are, but it has to be 5 years. And this is where people get sideways with the rules. Let's say I am not 30, but let's say I'm 60. I've never had a Roth IRA in my life, and I do this Roth conversion. I have access to those converted dollars because I am over 59 and a half. But the earnings will not be tax-free until I've had a Roth IRA for 5 years. So you've got that 5-year clock, which is applicable to the earnings on that conversion for a person that's over 59 and a half. We could do an hour on just the 5-year clocks on Roth IRAs. But as far as conversions go, once that 5 years is up, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can withdraw those converted dollars. You'll deplete your contributions first, and then you'll flow into the converted dollars.
So that leads me to now I'm going to stay on this topic because maybe we can do an hour. Another thing, again, that you talked about in the workshop that we attended was the timing and the aggregation of Roths, right? So if I'm 25 and I open up a Roth IRA for, say, $500, that's when my clock starts ticking, right? So then 10 years later, I can open up another Roth IRA and put $10,000. Well, I can't put $10,000 in it, but I could put $5,000 in it, right? But my
Mhm.
5-year clock has already passed me by.
Well, so this is the two different clocks that we're talking about. And this is where I call the first 5-year clock, I call the 5-year forever clock. The 5-year forever clock is that person in your example that put the $500 in and they started a Roth IRA. They started any Roth IRA. Boom, that clock starts to tick, that 5-year forever clock. And after 5 years, now they've had any Roth IRA for 5 years. So that box is checked. A subsequent conversion will have its own separate 5-year clock. So we've got the 5-year forever, which is when you just want to start a Roth IRA. Did you start a Roth IRA more than 5 years ago? Yes, I did. All right, you satisfied that 5-year forever clock because you've had any Roth IRA for 5 years. Any subsequent conversion, if I'm under 59 and a half, is going to have its own time-stamped 5-year clock that I have to wait to satisfy. Now, why is that important? Let's say I mentioned that 60-year-old that did that Roth conversion, never had a Roth IRA before in his life. He opens up a Roth with a conversion, does this conversion. Not only did that start his Roth conversion clock, but that also started his Roth 5-year forever clock. He wants to keep that going because let's say 6 years from now, he's 66 years old, and he's got a bunch of money in his Roth 401k at work. If he never had a Roth IRA and he rolled that money from the 401k into his Roth IRA, Roth plan 401k and Roth IRA clocks are independent of each other. You don't get to use the clock for both of them. So if that money rolls from his Roth plan to his Roth IRA and he never had a Roth before, he's got to start all over again, 5 more years before the earnings are tax-free. But if he had a Roth, if he started that Roth IRA and got his 5-year forever clock started, that money would come in and he would be immediately available to get those earnings out tax-free. So getting that Roth 5-year forever clock start is important for a number of reasons, but one of them is that 401k rollover.
We talk about all this and people try to make all of this sound so simple, right? But how many PBS shows has Ed done? 7 or 8, written 7 or 8 books, has these conferences 3-4 times a year. The training that I have to go to as an elite advisor is twice a year, right? That Andy, that you're one of the teachers at. Just this topic of Roth IRAs, we've been going on for about 15 or 20 minutes now. It is not simple. And this is why people make so many huge mistakes, costing themselves and their families literally tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is why, I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but this is why it's important having advisors that know what they're doing when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And it is super complicated. And I always joke because people will call, and advisors will call, smart, seasoned advisors will call and say, with a simple question, it's a 1-sentence question. What's the deal when I roll a Roth 401k to a Roth IRA? It is the easiest question. It's 1 sentence, and it is paragraphs of an answer because there's so many different variables there. So I'm not surprised that people get sideways with the rules, especially people that aren't in the profession. I don't know. Nobody would know how to time this out or what the clocks are or what happens when you do that, when you make those transactions. So yeah, it's important to certainly latch onto someone who knows what they're doing when it comes to these things.
Wow. Well, that's another mind-blowing episode, huh?
My
and
head
again,
hurts.
it's like I looked at the clock. I'm like, man, we just blew through that time like nobody's business. We didn't even get to a lot of the topics we wanted to. But yeah, I want to just talk about what you said there in the closing really quick there, Tom, about staying on top of this. And we've heard Ed and Andy have said it, several times at the conferences. It is that the tax code is ever evolving. It's changed every year, especially since 2017. You've had 2 major changes with the Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0. And this is really to commend you, Tommy, on 2 areas. Number one, for as seasoned and as old as you are, You never stop learning. There's a lot of guys that I've been to conferences with that, investment conferences that they've said, yeah, I'm past that point. I'm on the downside. I'm just trying to simplify things. And they're really missing the boat on the education that you continue to get every year, through, Ed Slott and other organizations. And the second point I want to bring up to our audience is a point of congratulations to Tommy for getting your RICP, phenomenal designation. So
appreciate that.
Tommy's a good friend of mine, but he's also been a mentor, for the last 10 years. And you're definitely someone I look to as inspiration in continuing your education and having such a high level for being so old.
Yeah, I'm still even with my bib and my drooling, I'm still learning, John.
So, well, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Retire Happy podcast. And, again, I want to thank Andy for coming on the show again and sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much, Andy.
Very, very welcome. Happy to be here. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I don't think we should be waiting another year and months to get Andy back on. I mean, I think we left about 30 questions on the table. So I think we need to be getting Andy back on here relatively soon to start going through some of these other things. If that's okay with Andy.
Yeah, happy to come back anytime. I enjoyed it.
Andy, Tommy's just booking you up right here. So
all good.
Well, folks, we hope you got as much. And really, this was an absolutely important episode. I mean, we always try to put out important episodes, but this is, the IRS expects you to get this right. There's very few wiggle room, as we talked about, in this show, irrevocable decisions. So very important show. We hope you took a lot out of it. And thank you once again for tuning in to the Retire Happy podcast. I'm your host, John Amarino, signing off. And Tommy, we'll see you later. And Andy, thank you for coming on.
Be well, everybody.
It's easy to get in touch with John and Thomas. If you're more on the West Coast, give John a call at 858-935-6210. That's 858-935-6210, or go online to GoSecurus.com. That's GoSecurus.com. If you're more of an East Coaster, then call Thomas, 973-394-0623. That's 973-394-0623, and online at internationalfinancial.com. That's internationalfinancial.com. And you can, of course, always just check the description or the show notes section of today's show for all that contact information. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting apps, and we'll see you next time on the Retire Happy Podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, LLC BCM, a registered investment advisor. BCM, Securus Financial, and International Financial Advisory Group are independent of each other. Insurance products and services are not offered through BCM, but are offered and sold through individually licensed and appointed agents. The opinions expressed by John Iammarino, Thomas O'Connell, and guests on this show are their own and are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Past performance cannot be used as an indicator to determine future results. Any strategies mentioned may not be suitable for everyone. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. Before acting on any information mentioned, please consult with a qualified tax or investment advisor to determine if it is suitable for your specific situation. This program is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to the subjects covered. Registered investment advisors and investment advisor representatives act as fiduciaries for all of our investment management clients. We have an obligation to act in the best interests of our clients and to make full disclosure of any conflicts of interest, if any exist. Please refer to our firm brochure, the ADV 2A Item 4, for additional information.